As time passes, more and more of the memories start coming back to Whitley Strieber, more and more, even the smells of what happened that night. And he suddenly is convinced it was not a dream. And then, and this is what makes Communion so convincing, Strieber himself doesn't believe it. In fact, he's sort of downright embarrassed by what's happened to him.
The night that okay, here goes, that I saw them.
But you saw who?
Someone came for me that night.
Who came for you?
Somebody came into the house. And,
Wait a minute, what did you say?
Somebody came into the house and took me, and they gave me a shot in the back of my skull. And this is ridiculous. They were small, bluish skin, and there were others. Long, thin faces and big eyes. And this is the tough part. They did not appear to be human.
At first, Whitley Strieber figures he's going crazy, and, well, most of us would probably agree with him. But the more he thinks about it, the more he starts remembering strange things have been happening to him all his life. Here's an episode from when he was 12 years old, again in bed, but suddenly waking up. My father was standing near my sister in blue pajamas, his arms dangling at his sides, on his look a face of surprise. Then his eyes moved until they rested on something he could not see. Almost in slow motion, his face simply broke up. He threw his head back, and something like an electric shock seemed to go through him. His eyes bulged, and his mouth flew open, and there was a screaming, but I could hear it only faintly, a muffled shrieking, full of terror and despair. I mean, this is well written. My eyes start watering when I read this. I get scared. But of course, it's so weird, he figures he's going nuts. So he goes in and he sees a psychiatrist. No problems. He goes in, he has brain scans done. No problems. Finally, in desperation, he goes and has hypnosis therapy.
Listen to me, Whitley. Look up at my finger. That's it. Keep looking at my finger. I'm going to count to 10 as you're falling asleep. And when I'm finished, you'll be deeply, deeply asleep. 1, falling asleep. 2, falling asleep. 3, falling asleep. 4, falling asleep. 5, falling asleep. Whitley? Whitley, let's go back to that first time, the night of October 4th, last October 4th. What do you see?
Is there someone there? You know, I see you. I'm seeing someone there. I don't think I like this.
It's going fine.
Get out!
It's going fine.
Away! Get away! Out! Get out! Get away! Why me? What have I done? This is no good. I can't do this.
Whitley, tell me what you see.
I'm not hypnotized now, am I?
I think you just came out of it.
In Communion, Strieber encounters a variety of different kinds of creatures. He's actually physically kidnapped by some short creatures with blue skin who he calls the Good Army. They're under some sort of mind control, apparently, by a taller creature that only shows itself briefly. And on board the ship, he's actually prodded and poked by a tall female with a head like a praying mantis who speaks to him in English. This coincides rather eerily with Disney's new film, The Little Mermaid, which also theorizes a wide variety of sentient beings who can communicate to us in a language we understand. It's all very strange.
My dear sweet child.
And it zipped to the top of the New York Times bestseller list under non-fiction titles. But was it fiction or was it non-fiction? A lot of people were mighty skeptical. But I don't know. There's something about the idea of being taken aboard a spaceship. Doesn't sound all that weird to me. And Whitley Strieber is not the first person by any means to claim that he was taken aboard or abducted by aliens. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of people with similar stories. In fact, at one point in Communion, he gets together with 7 other people who have been abducted, and they do a sort of a group therapy, each sharing what happened to them. And the strange part is, and again, it's very eerie, is that a lot of them have similar experiences. Being put in very small rooms, having needles inserted into their heads, encountering very short aliens, 3.5 feet tall, big eyes, no hair. In fact, there's a drawing of one of them on the cover of Communion. I don't know, is it just me, or does that look like Ming the Merciless, Flash Gordon's archenemy? Or is it Wally Cox? Or maybe it's Sonny Bono. That's it, Sonny Bono. Joe Clark, it's Joe Clark. I was kidnapped by Joe. That's it. Joe Clark is there. Ed Conroy was a freelance writer for the San Antonio Express News when he read Communion. He was immediately skeptical and decided to conduct an independent investigation into the phenomena and Whitley Strieber. The result was Report on Communion. It's just come out by Ed Conroy. And his conclusion, among other things, is that at the very least, Whitley Strieber is not lying to make a quick buck, even though he did make quite a few quick bucks. In fact, now the book's out, Ed Conroy will probably make a few quick bucks. It's easy to dismiss Whitley Strieber as a horror writer with a lot of anxieties going through his midlife crisis and getting one heck of a bestseller out of it. But it wasn't just in his mind. All of the other people who were in the house that night, and there were 4 others, they had some guests over, woke up and when they thought about it, had some very odd experiences happen to them that night. His wife, Anne, remembers waking up at one point, seeing bright, bright light, being told that the roof was on fire, and then just rolling over and going right back to sleep. She was obviously a little upset about it too, and it didn't make sense. She volunteered for hypnosis as well. Very scary.
10, falling asleep, deeply, deeply asleep. Anne, let's go back in time. Do you remember Christmas?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go back farther. Go back to the night that Alex and Sarah came to the house. Do you remember that night?
Well, it wasn't a very peaceful night.
Go on.
The house was full. It was like a party.
A party?
I don't think Whitley was there very much of the time.
What about your son?
God! Oh, God, he's screaming. Look. Oh! It's painful to hear. Oh, it's like something's happening to him. Whitley's going. I want to go. I've got to go. You're not supposed to go. I've got to go!
Talking to you.
I can't say. I'm not supposed to say. I don't know. I'm not supposed to do this.
Why? What's preventing you?
I'm out of it. I'm out of it, right? I'm out of it.
Yes, quite suddenly.
I don't know. There was somebody. There was something. There was somebody else.
Whitley Strieber wrote Communion really as a form of therapy to get it out of his system. The problem was after the book was published, he kept having the visitations. And so he wrote a second book called Transformation. Here he finally opens himself up to the aliens, or whatever they are, and has a sort of a level of consciousness raised. He has a transformation. The aliens show him all sorts of apocalyptic visions, including one where the ozone layer completely disappears. Ed Conroy's report on communion admits that there's no hard evidence, no physical evidence, that Whitley Strieber and the hundreds of other people who claim they've been abducted by aliens were actually abducted. And even Whitley himself is really reluctant to believe that aliens from far-off galaxies are interested in following him through his whole life. At the end, he actually sits down, Whitley sits down with Ed Conroy and gives him his theory. There is a tradition in the context of the visitor experience, a great deal of material about the stealing of fetuses at the end of the first trimester. This is something that goes back a long time in folk tradition. Bud Hopkins comments on it in his book, as does E.S. Hartland in his book about fairy lore, The Science of Fairy Tales. Okay, so are we being visited by mythical characters, fairy tale characters, bug-eyed characters, insects that can speak English? That's the theory of communion.
This whole new rebirth in the idea of alien abduction. I've always thought UFOs say something either about a brand new phenomena or a phenomena we can't define yet, not flying saucers from Mars, anything like that, but something unusual. And now with all this alien abduction business going on, what is the psychological need that's being fulfilled if it's a complete fake, or else what is the real phenomena which is at the base of people saying I was taken to the moon in a flying saucer?
Alien abduction has long been a popular theme in science fiction books. Toronto writer Garfield Reeve Stevens researched the subject of alien abduction and used it as the basis for his book, Night Eyes.
Night Eyes came out of my fascination with the claims of alien abduction, starting with Betty and Barney Hill in the early 60s and coming up now to Whitley Strieber and Communion and Transformation. And I had originally read about alien abductions, dismissed them. Then with the new interest in them, I started paying more attention, saw that some people were trying to conduct some type of scientific research into it. It's very loose. And I was intrigued, and I thought, all these different people are telling basically the same story. All the details are different. What is an explanation that would work to account for everybody's claims of alien abduction? You know, why is it sometimes they're 4 feet tall, sometimes they're 6 feet tall, sometimes they have big heads, sometimes they have small heads? What are these claims about babies being made half human, half alien? And I sat down and over the course of a week came up with a theory, a science fiction theory that would explain all these things, who the aliens are, where they came from. And I put that together in Night Eyes, a story of two different groups of people who are experiencing abductions, and the story tells what the aliens are after.
Jerry Purnell wrote about alien abduction in his Janissary series of books. He figured if aliens have been visiting us for a long time, why haven't they made themselves known? He figures it's because they're up to something illegal. He came up with the idea that people are being shanghaied by an interstellar press gang to fight their wars on an alien world. That's the theme of the Janissary's books. The books include detailed battle maps and drawings, but somehow the basic premise just doesn't hold water. The basic premise just doesn't hold water. And one of Commander Rick's favorite alien abduction stories is The Lion's Game by James H. Schmitz. Telsey Amberdon is Schmitz's most enduring character, a 15-year-old teeny bopper with amazing mental powers. In The Lion's Game, she's kidnapped by aliens who test her psi powers. If she loses, so does a whole civilization and a few planets. What Commander Rick likes about Schmitz is that he believes that the human race should be as varied as possible so that we can come up with as many possible solutions to threats and problems, so that if we face a threat to our existence, we don't just resort to the simplest solution of violence. Jay Ingram, you've just written a book called The Science of Everyday Life. As the host of Quirks and Quarks, you've talked about a lot of hard science and a lot of fringe science, and I want to ask you what you think of all of the alien abduction stories that are going around.
Well, alien abduction stories are a lot like some other so-called fringe stories that I've been interested in over the years, and they're all fascinating. One would have to be dull to say that they're not interesting and gripping, in fact. I think what you have to look at is the real hard evidence. There have been psychiatrists who have said that some of these people, and not all, show symptoms of some things that they can categorize as derangement or some sort of mental illness. I'm sure that that doesn't account for all of them, but I think that may be a factor. But you got to get some hard evidence. One of the common stories is that the aliens, after abducting somebody, will inject a tiny sphere somewhere in their upper nasal passages or even at the base of the brain.
Well, Whitley Strieber talked about that in Communion, about having a sore nose and remembering something being shoved up his nose. And Ed Conroy, who investigated it and wrote Report on Communion, said that he started having the dreams and then woke up one morning and his pillow was covered in blood and he'd never had a bloody nose in his life. So sorry for interrupting, but...
No, not at all. Very interesting information, but does that actually bear out this claim that tiny spheres have been inoculated into them? Let's see some CAT scans or some PET scans in detail and see if we can locate a sphere. In fact, Bud Hopkins told me they were going to be doing that. I haven't heard the results of such a study. The thing that I'm confident will turn out will be this, that you'll get some CAT scans or some PET scans, some nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, something that may have a vaguely circular feature in it.
Right.
And there will be people who say, look, there's the sphere. And I've heard Sasquatch experts, so-called, point out dappled leaves in a bush and say, look, there's the Sasquatch.
Right.
I'm afraid that a lot of it is the feelings you bring into the study with you.
Right. I mean, how many of us haven't sworn we saw a face, and it's something else, or heard a sound at night and it turns out to be cat?
I swear that I can actually see you if I think hard enough right now.
Well, exactly. Jay, we don't have a choice in the matter. When the aliens come for us, they come for us. But if you could be abducted by anyone, who would it be, ideally?
Well, not somebody from Hollywood, if that's what you're asking. I'll tell you who I'd like to be abducted by. You're not going to believe that I'm going to say this.
Uh-huh.
There's a very famous little book, this is by way of an introduction, called Flatland, written in 1884, that talks about a two-dimensional being, a guy, a square, who lives as if in the surface skin of a table, and is totally unaware that there's a third dimension, height. And a sphere comes and takes him away from Flatland, plucks him out of his two-dimensional world, and says, look at this. There actually is a three-dimensional world. I want the fourth-dimensional version of that person, the sphere, to come to me, pluck me out of this three-dimensional veil of tears, and show me the fourth dimension.
I don't believe he said that. You were right. I didn't believe it.
I'll say it again.
Well, there you go. Well, now, if you're going to start talking about people who are flat and just have height and width but no depth,
yep.
I think you're talking about people who are on TV, aren't you? Aren't we just screen image? I mean, what are you right here?
But only regular people who are on TV regularly, not guests like me.
Okay. See, I can see the back of his head. There's nothing there. He's hollow. While we're talking about aliens and mutants, check out The New Mutants by Chris Claremont again, this time with art by veteran Bill Sienkiewicz. Warlock is one of the most interesting characters in comics. He's a mechanical construct from a race of machines. Because he's an organic machine, he can alter his own shape, like a car that can customize itself. He was sent to Earth to learn about humans, and now he's become a full-fledged member of the New Mutants, under the watchful eye of Professor Charles Xavier, the man who also heads up the X-Men. Hey, you know the economy is bad when even the superheroes have to take on two jobs. At the end of Ed Conroy's book, Report on Communion, he has a sort of an embarrassing epilogue. After he started researching the alien abduction phenomena, he's been followed around by strange, unmarked helicopters dozens of times. I got a good long look at them through my binoculars as they flew over downtown San Antonio in a northeasterly direction, as did my upstairs neighbor, Linda Winchester, who commented to me as I was returning to my apartment from my perch on the building's fire escape that she was wondering why she hadn't seen a wreck of the two helicopters. And every time he starts talking about UFOs and Whitley Strieber on the phone, helicopters appear outside his house. Is everybody going nuts down there or what? In Report on Communion, Ed Conroy goes from being a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic to being a sort of a believer. He concludes that Whitley Strieber really does believe that what he is telling people did happen to him. Yes, he believes it, but hey, people believe they're Napoleon. Well, some people do anyway. People believe all sorts of strange things, respectable people. Heck, you can go out and buy a newspaper on the corner, a newspaper which prides itself on reporting just the facts and reporting them accurately, and then you can turn to the horoscopes page. Right. A classic X-Men story, The Days of Future Past, is by Chris Claremont with artwork by John Byrne. It's just been reprinted in a special Marvel album. It opens in the future when the government passes a Mutant Registration Act to eliminate all mutants. So a woman travels back in time to now to warn the X-Men of the danger that lies ahead. So, are there alien beings living amongst us, hidden away, or maybe even creatures from another dimension, fairies, who knows what? Well, no. No, relax. Stay in your houses. Do not panic. We won't hurt you. Write letters to Commander Rick. Stay calm. Send him videotapes. Watch the show. Watch it often. Tell your friends about it. We won't hurt you. We won't hurt you. We're your friends. We just want some things from you. Greetings, prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick on board Reality One. I'm the voice of reason in a world gone mad. Of course, it went mad when it found out I was the voice of reason, but there you go. Well, 1989 was quite a year. The communist bloc breaks apart, the Cold War winds down, the superpowers start talking about disarmament, but most importantly, Back to the Future Part 2 hits the theaters just in time for the holidays.
You gotta get out and change clothes.
Right now, it's pouring rain.
Wait 5 more seconds. Right on the tick. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Too bad the post office isn't as efficient as the weather service.
Future. Unbelievable. I gotta check this out, Doc.
All in good time, Marty. We're on a tight schedule here.
Tell me about my future. I mean, I know I make it big, but what do I become, like a rich rock star?
Please, Marty, no one should know too much about their own destiny.
Right, right. I am rich, though, right?
Marty, please, take off your shirt.
The neat thing about time travel is possibilities. Not only can you be in 2 places at once, but you can be in the same place twice, right? Right. H.G. Wells, The Time Machine. H.G. Wells, Michael Corrin. Let's talk to Michael Corrin. He's a biographer. He's done a biography on G.K. Chesterton, and he's actually working right now on a biography of Wells. Michael?
Hello.
Hello. There we go. Ah, there you are.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can. Commander Rick, I wanted to ask you a quick question. You're working on a biography of H.G. Wells.
I am.
Is there room for another biography?
Absolutely not. No, it's a complete waste of time.
Good, good.
There is, because the view of Wells has been that he was an avuncular, nice man. In fact, he was quite the opposite. He treated women terribly. He was an anti-Semite. He was a racist. He was really a very unpleasant man indeed. And I aim to balance the picture somewhat.
Whoa, I didn't know all of that. Oh. Now, did H.G. Wells write the first time travel story?
Not really, no. He made it popular.
What was before him?
There were several authors who were not good authors. If they were published in small magazines or small print editions. Wells made time traveling popular. The Time Machine isn't science fiction. It would be anachronistic to call it that. The term wasn't coined until later.
Yeah,
they're scientific romances, and they're political parallels. Wells wrote 70 books. Only 7 or 8 of them are connected with science fiction.
So he in fact, didn't like being called a science fiction writer, did he?
No, he would have hated it. He was a political writer. He was drawing a metaphor of the age, of 1 and 2 classes, of the upper class and the lower class, and he did this in The Time Machine.
Which was the Morlocks and the Eloi, is that?
Exactly, and in fact it was probably inspired by his experience in his mother's work. She was a maid in an upstairs-downstairs situation, the other side of upstairs-downstairs, and he was provoked, inspired by this experience.
Politically, where was he then? Left? Very left?
Very left, but left for personal reasons. He had such a chip on his shoulder, it was almost tangible. He was in the Fabian Society, a friend of George Bernard Shaw, and so on, but he wasn't liked by Shaw. He was the advocate of a new society, a free love society, a new utopia, where various classes would be very strict, and the top class, the Platonic class, would rule. He, of course, was part of that class.
Oh,
Those
really?
at the bottom would be done away with. He actually wrote this, they would be done away with.
Whoa, that...
And they included what he called dark and swarthy people.
Whoa, so, I mean, we're talking Kampuchea here.
We're talking someone who was a social engineer in the same tradition as Hitler and Stalin and in Cambodia, yeah.
Whoa. This is going to be a good book to read. What are you going to... Have you got a working title yet?
I can think of 1 or 2, but I'll probably just call it H.G. Wells' A Life. Comes out the end of 1990.
The very best time travel stories, and this includes Back to the Future Part 2, reaffirm the idea that life has possibilities, that there is some sort of cosmic justice operating in the world, and we can make a difference in the universe. Life has possibilities. We shouldn't just accept the way things are. We are responsible for our own destiny if we are prepared to make the effort and to bear responsibility. Darn, I knew there was a catch.
Wait a minute.
Reality. It's an invented reality. It's a time travel machine that sort of lasts forever. It can take you into the future, into the past. There's a whole new kind of filmmaking, though, now. Not just animation, but computer animation. It doesn't exist anywhere. Before we get into it too heavily, let's talk to an expert. I'm going to see if I can get Jeff Evans. Jeff is a product manager at Commodore Amiga, or is it Amiga Commodore? Let's find out. Jeff?
Rick.
Hello. There you go. Tell me about computer animation, because your company does it and you know quite a bit about it, the history of computer animation.
Well, basically, computers were originally developed to do military things, to calculate the trajectories of missiles and rockets.
Right.
And it's actually not too far from that to calculate the shapes and movements of objects on a video screen. That where people developed computers perhaps for malevolent things initially, people began to play with them and to try to create an environment where they could develop their own ideas, show their own ideas.
Now, a computer animated picture doesn't exist anywhere, right? I mean, what is it exactly? Because nobody's drawn anything. Is it entered into a computer just as numbers, keyboard?
Well, computer software controls a video display. It controls the patterns of dots on a display. And you have mathematical formulas that will allow you to describe shapes and then describe the falling of light onto those shapes. They call it ray tracing. Originally, the mathematics were developed for building lenses by calculating the direction of light going onto a surface and then how it would be reflected or refracted as it bounced off or went through that lens. And essentially, computer animation software will work in a number of ways. One is to allow you to build a shape from scratch, to build it out of simple cubes and spheres, and then to show it moving through space, and to lay colors and textures and patterns onto it.
Can you, let me see if we can pump some of this animation. Do you have some there you can pump up? Let me see if I can send it up on a second feed line here. I'll pump it up here. Oh, there we go. Got it on channel B.
That's right. This is a three-dimensional bee that was designed by an Amiga user entirely on the computer, and you can see that there's a reflection of light on the surfaces. Also that the point of view, or at least the motion of the object, shows that it's a three-dimensional form which is being manipulated by the computer. And it looks very realistic.
Now, how long did it take the user to do that, to create that thing? I mean, that looks like, well, to me, years and years of work. Obviously, it wasn't.
Well, there were probably a few nights spent burning the midnight oil, but most of the work would actually be done by the computer, drawing the individual rays of light going down onto that shape and showing the highlights and the shadows.
So the computer took a long, long time to create these series of images, one frame at a time, and then stored them all, and then just ran them like flicking the corner of a magazine with the little stick drawings and stuff.
It can flip the pages at high speed, especially on the Amiga, because it has a special
But it couldn't create
process.
them this fast.
No, probably, depending on the kind of computer that the animator was using, it might have taken him or her a few hours to describe the shapes, and then the computer several hours to draw them. However, the animator could have been asleep while the computer was actually doing the final drawing. The computers...
Oh, so the government could use these computers then. Is that what you're saying? Have everybody asleep at the same time?
Well, the saying is garbage in, garbage out. If the user has a really good initial idea, then the computer can be a useful tool for realizing that idea and communicating it. If the user has nothing interesting to say, then the computer will say that uninteresting thing very effectively.
Canadians are also on the cutting edge of computer graphics. Let's talk to a Canadian computer artist, Nick Palilko. Nick. Hello, Nick. Can you hear me?
Hi, Rick. Coming in.
There you are, Nick. How do you draw on a computer?
Well, there's a couple of ways to get pictures into the computer. One way is ray tracing, where you use 3D objects, and you create 3D objects by entering points into the computer with the mouse, and the computer actually creates the object for you.
Sort of connect the dots?
Yeah, sort of connect the dots and renders them into the machine. and you can control the light sources, and it renders the shadows for you, does all the color work. Another way is to use a drawing tablet, pressure-sensitive tablet, where you can use a pen and paper and just draw like you would normally.
And then it feels underneath where your pen has moved and transfers that
Exactly.
onto the screen. That's the kind of thing they would use on, I see the football games always afterwards drawing. They're working on they show the play and the arrows and where they went.
Right.
That's using a